I think there's going to be an attack on cryptocurrency from a environmental perspective, and I think we're starting to see that already. The CCAF now is basically coming out and saying that the original numbers, I think, coming from the Bitcoin Mining Council were incorrect. So what we're seeing now is essentially another side, of course, coming from Cambridge University. You guys can start lining this out how you like in your own heads. But I would say that it's becoming very clear that we have two sides to this battle surrounding Bitcoin mining and specifically proof of work. I'm of the mindset that proof of work is the only thing that can actually provide individual sovereignty and financial freedom. Personally, that's how I see it. It looks pretty clear to me that the position, Ethereum has put themselves in with the merge has shown that proof of stake makes itself more susceptible to government control and interference. And I think that a lot of the movements against proof of work mining, especially from the environmental aspect, is to a certain extent, smoke and mirrors to shut down anything that gives the individual more freedom. That's how I feel about it. All right. So Bitcoin mining's sustainable electricity mix may be declining, says Cambridge University Research Organization. The CCAF uses publicly available data to run a theoretical model to estimate the environmental footprint of Bitcoin mining. Cambridge University Center for Alternative Finances, the CCAF, latest research into Bitcoin mining suggests the mix of sustainable electricity used is in decline. The CCAF, which is part of the Cambridge Judge Business School, uses publicly available data to run a theoretical model to estimate the environmental footprint of Bitcoin mining. It does this by breaking down its electricity mix and calculating its greenhouse gas carbon dioxide emission intensity per kilowatt hour. It found that emissions intensity for 2021 was 506.71 CO2 emissions, essentially the GCO2e, which is the carbon dioxide emission intensity that we defined earlier, over the kilowatt hour, compared to 491.24 in 2020. Data for this year is so far only available up to January, so no conclusions can yet be drawn for 2022 at the time being. Since 2019, the CCAS Bitcoin mining or Bitcoin electricity consumption index has provided a daily estimate of the amount of electricity used by Bitcoin mining globally. Additionally, its mining map rolled out in 2020 is used to visualize the geographical distribution of mining activities. Now the CCAF has combined the two elements to estimate greenhouse gas emissions attributable to Bitcoin more fully. While electricity consumption is an important factor, it does not take into account the differing electricity sources that power mining from one country to the next, and how these different countries' relative shares of the global hash rate vary over time. The uptick in fossil fuel emission intensity in Bitcoin mining from 2020 to 2021 could be attributed to the collapse in share conducted using hydropower since the crackdown of industry in China last year. Here's my question about that, and I'll just pose this to you guys. I don't think you can actually attribute it to that because if I recall, the way China was getting cheap power was by spinning up old coal plants. And so, why is the narrative shifting now that it was all hydropower and moving over to the States is not, especially if we take into account that a majority of the hash rate that moved from China was trying to move to West Texas, where essentially you run off wind power and solar power. It doesn't really make much sense to me. It's like the narrative conveniently shifts and the numbers conveniently shift just based on if they can or cannot attack Bitcoin from an environmental standpoint. But my understanding is right up to the end there, China was powering up, or the Chinese miners were working deals with old coal plants to spin old coal plants back up and mine off of them. Now, another point to that we would have to bring up as well is, to my knowledge, they never stopped mining in China either. They just started using VPNs. So the mining, they did stop and move to places like Kazakhstan or West Texas, right? And if anything, like, I don't know, and 40% of it didn't turn off, at least from what we know at this point. So I don't know that I buy this. In 2020, the CCAF found that China accounted for 65% of the world's total hash rate, with the majority of mining activity there powered by either hydropower or coal. Hydropower's share in 2021, however, was down 18.5%, with the coals reduced slightly to 38.2%. The CCAF concluded that 37.6% of electricity used by Bitcoin miners comes from sustainable sources, compared to the 62% from fossil fuels. This figure is at odds with that provided by the Bitcoin Mining Council, which says 59% of electricity used by the industry comes from sustainable sources. And you heard my arguments like before. I start asking questions because clearly there's a huge disparity here. And I almost go back to like there's a Stoic quote that says, like, don't confuse me with facts, I'm trying to think. And I feel like this is the perfect situation where, like, us as people that can't go in and like validate all of this ourselves, because we're basically getting two different entities giving us two completely different figures here, have to start thinking logically about this and saying, like, okay, well, if you're saying it's because China shut down when they were clearly spinning up old coal plants, which was like your original argument, how much of this is true and how much of it is not true, right? If we're saying the majority of the hash rate moved to the United States and West Texas in particular, we know that West Texas is utilizing a ton of solar and wind power. Therefore, it wouldn't make sense that you would move hash rate that was running off of coal and spinning up new coal power plants in China over to more sustainable energy in a place like Texas, and then you would all of a sudden have the numbers flip and it would be more dirty energy. That doesn't make any sense to me. So if I'm just thinking about this logically, then I tend to say the CCAF isn't making any sense to me, because what they've said previously compared to what they're saying now doesn't add up, right? But, they'll provide us with their facts. We could be just as amiss and miss it with the bias and side with the Bitcoin Mining Council, right? So here's another point that I would bring up. Bitcoin Mining Council, do they attribute the fact that there was a bunch of hash rate that moved to Kazakhstan where it is dirtier energy, right? Because they're a poorer third world country. They have more coal plants. They spun more up there. So I couldn't tell you that either one is right. All I can really tell you is that you have to think about what you're being told from both perspectives, and then realize that their facts are just being manipulated to support their narrative at this point. And that includes both the CCAF and the Bitcoin Mining Council. Governments, regulators, and others frequently cite the energy-intensive nature of proof-of-work Bitcoin mining as one of the main flaws in the world's largest cryptocurrency, with some taking a proactive stance towards attempting to curtail it. Earlier this month, the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, the OSTP, published a report on Bitcoin mining, calling for more research so that federal agencies can minimize harm on the environment and electricity grids. I still think this is a narrative to remove proof-of-work. And the reason you want to remove proof of work is that it is clear, if you have proof of stake, that the U.S. will find some way to claim jurisdiction over all of the transactions on it. Will they do that successfully? It's hard to tell. But what we can see is that somehow the U.S. government has successfully removed the rights of its citizens systematically over the past 20 years, utilizing different narratives that cause fear in the public, right? From, Afghanistan and the Patriot Act to more recently, of course, COVID and the lockdowns. And now we're moving into the environmental push. And, I hate to throw on the tinfoil hat here, but it's hard when you go and you actually see these people stating the particular strategy and then the strategy being actually played out. And the next portion in this strategy, apparently at this point, is to have a huge environmental push to basically make the public feel guilty about the environment, to basically start to restrict different freedoms and so on through that narrative. Will that be the case? I don't know. But if when we start to see attacks on this from the perspective of basically, I can tell you that proof of work has a better chance at this point of providing financial autonomy and individual financial freedom for sure than proof of stake. And there's a huge move against it from the environmental side. Then I go, well, maybe that wasn't such such a tinfoil hat theory that I was hearing. And these are things that I think about. They're the things that keep me up at night, boys. Furthermore, Ether's recent merge from proof of work model to less energy intensive proof of stake with claims that it will make it 99% more energy efficient put further pressure on Bitcoin's mining mechanism. And of course it does. Of course that's what they will tell you. Duh. I don't think that it puts more pressure on it though. Bitcoin will not move to proof of stake. I don't think that there's any worry there. I think the reason Bitcoin is scary is because it's essentially impossible to move it to proof of stake. I think that's why it will see more regulation and more FUD thrown at it from this perspective. Thanks for checking out this clip from the Crypto Mining Show. You can check out the full episode here or more crypto content down here. Also, I'd like you to check out my locals page at sonofatech.locals.com where you can become a member for free or choose to be a $5 a month supporter that unlocks additional content.